Hi, and welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals. I'm Scott Abel, your co-host today, and joining me is my co-host, Megan Gilhooly.
Hey, Scott, how are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. I'm so happy to be here and glad that we have a bunch of people here watching the Content Advantage. On today's show, we're going to talk about content strategy past, stopping a bit to talk about the foundations of the discipline, where where we're at today, and then we'll dive into where we think we're going, where we're headed to in the future. And so we have invited a superstar, a very knowledgeable content strategist, Rahel Anne Bailie, to talk to us.
Yay, Rahel. Hi, Rahel.
Hey, Rahel. So, Rahel, you have recently attempted to document the history of content strategy, and we really want to get your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities that are facing content folks. So, we're very excited to have you. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit, just to get going, a little bit about yourself and your connection to this topic of content strategy?
Oh my goodness. I heard myself described recently as one of the originals, and I thought, no, I'm not. And then I thought, so there's like not one of the originals back in the 1940s, wasn't alive then, but there is this group, Scott amongst us, right? Scott and Rockley, me, we were calling ourselves content strategists back around 2000, 2001. And, I did that for a while and nobody knew what it was. So they'd go like, no, I need to hire somebody who can do X. And I'm thinking, but that's a content strategist. And then I went away from that and then came back to it. For a while, I called myself a content management consultant. And then I thought I wrote code and I was like, no, I'm at the content side. So at some point then Anne published her book and Christina Halverson really socialized the phrase. And so then I could call myself a content strategist again. And then people knew what it was that I did. So that was kind of an interesting journey.
Very
Excellent.
interesting.
And the books that you're referring to are Anne Rockley's book, Managing Enterprise Content, a Unified Content Strategy, for those of you who are watching the show and would like to pick up a copy of that book. It is sometimes called the Bible of Content Strategy. It has a pretty good foundational information in there that any content strategist could benefit from. And you also mentioned another book. What was the other book that you mentioned? Oh, Christina Halverson's Content Strategy for the Web is obviously a book that helps popularize content strategy amongst a bunch of content people who didn't know what it was before she had mentioned it and wrote a book about it. So together we definitely brought some more education to the marketplace. And speaking of education, let me educate the audience members who are watching the show today, especially if you're watching for the first time. We can't see or hear you, so you don't have to worry about your camera or microphone. You don't have to cover it up with tape or anything. Worry about that. Also, you can't really directly talk with us. In other words, you can't chat back and forth, but you can ask a question of us at any time by using the Ask a Questions tab located in your webinar viewing panel. It allows you to access a little text chat room where you can chat a message to us. We can't chat back, but rest assured, we'll have your message. And if it's a question for Rahel, we'll queue them up as appropriate with the time that we have available on today's show. You can also access additional content in the attachments and links section of your webinar viewing panel, where you can download documents provided by Rahel or the sponsor of today's show, Zoom In Software. There's also some troubleshooting information in there and access to some references that we might make during the show. So you can check that out during the show at any time and download whatever you'd like. On the way out the door, I'll remind you at the end of the show to give us a 1 through 5 star rating, allowing us to know what you thought about the content of today's show. 5 is a high rating. There's a little field in there to provide some context if you'd like to share why you gave the rating that you did. And today's show is brought to you by Zoom Software. We'll tell you a little bit more about them later in the show. All right, Megan, let's see how much content.
Wonderful. Yes, such a fun topic. Such a fun topic. Collectively, you, Rahel, and Scott and I have, I don't even know how many decades of experience with this topic. But just to ensure that everybody understands where we're coming from and what we're talking about, let's start with a definition. So in your mind, Rahel, what is content strategy?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. So I have the definition that I teach at university, which is if you take the word content and the word strategy and you put them together, content is contextualized human usable data. So a piece of data is useful, but there's no context to it. So if I said to you, what's 12? Is it good or bad? You would say, I don't know, 12 what? So, $12 for a paperclip, probably not so good. $12 for, a fabulous meal. Oh, that's a real bargain. So, as soon as you contextualize that data, you've got content. And what's a strategy? A strategy is just a fancy word for a plan. So we're content planners. And when you think about it, so that's kind of one definition that I use. But I also say that we are the management consultants of the content world, because we are supposed to plan for the whole thing.
Right.
So I have a friend who's from Zimbabwe, and when he was there, he did management consulting for agriculture. So he did farming turnarounds. I have a friend here who is a management consultant with one of the big five, and he does financial turnarounds. I do content turnarounds. So to me, a content strategist is somebody who does content turnarounds. You go in, you assess, you gather a bunch of information, you analyze it, you look at what are you doing now? Where do you want to be? What's stopping you from getting there? In other words, a gap analysis. And then you put together a plan to get them there. And you can't think of only the editorial side. You have to think about it, but it's not just the editorial side. It's often that, if you write some content in a forest and nobody can hear you speak, it doesn't exist, right? So are all of the technical underpinnings actually there to be able to do the things you want to do with content? So it's about systematizing content. So to me, so it's a strategy is good, but if a company were to put it in a drawer and not implement it, then is it a strategy? So so why are you doing the strategy? Because you want to operationalize something. You want to smooth out your editorial processes, your technical processes, your governance processes, or all of the above. Usually it's all of the above and then some. Then you're doing content strategy, to me.
I think you're on something there. And it also kind of sounds like a doctor's job, right? You go in with some symptoms and you might even think you know what's wrong.
Right.
And then you say, doctor, I need you to make my sinus infection go away. And they go, well, before we do that, let's assess whether you have a sinus infection.
Exactly.
And then let's look at the repercussions of your proposed solution, right? And so I think there's a lot of parallels there.
Well, there are also a lot of kinds of doctors. So, I'm not going to go to a psychiatrist and say, can you cure my sinus infection? So, I don't want to make it sound like every content strategist does the same thing that I do. Some people focus on, social media. Some people focus on product content. Some people focus on marketing content. But the thing is, just like any doctor, they've all gone to medical school and they should all know the basics. We're kind of the other way around. And there's a blog post that I wrote about how we are like doctors on the website of FH Joanneum University in Austria. And I talk about how there are parallels to, being in medicine. But then at some point, the metaphor breaks down because we don't all come to the table with that same anatomy. We all studied anatomy. We come from all different backgrounds and we're pooling our knowledge instead. So it's an interesting, as the queen of metaphors, it's interesting for me to be stumped at some point and going, I can't take that metaphor any farther.
Well, speaking of being stumped, lots of people are stumped. And that's why I'm sure, but you can tell the audience what your motivation was. But you wrote a piece recently called An Uneven History of Content Strategy. Could you tell us what it is and why did you find the need to create it?
Oh, that's interesting. So the immediate need was that the Content Strategy Alliance, which is trying to fill the void of having some sort of a professional association, so they're trying to fill that void. They wanted to have an introduction to content strategy, and as I already teach introduction to content strategy at the university in the master's program, they wanted me to also do a smaller module for them. But that they had a second module called the History of. And I looked and looked and looked online, and I couldn't find anything except for one, quite old now. It was done in 2013, and article. And so I thought, if I'm going to teach this, I need to have something to point people to.
Right.
And so I decided to, I asked Firehead, CJ Walker from Firehead, if I could kind of cannibalize what had been written. And there were as many comments as were the original, kind of going, you got this wrong and you got that wrong. But, people don't read the comments a lot of the times. So they might just read, that original and think that was it. So I took that article and I took the comments and I thought, this will be easy. I'll just incorporate these comments. And 10,000 words later,
you're still working on it.
Done weeks of research. And of course, when I said that I was doing this, people came up and added things in. And actually, I have a long list of edits to do. So I intend to make this a living document as people discover it and then go, oh, and by the way, you left this out and maybe you can add this in. And I'm trying to get it to reflect not just the United States or not just North America, but like the world, like what's happening in Australia, what's happening in South Africa, what's happening around the world. So that's a little harder. I imagine, over the course of a year, I'm going to get more and more information. And I called it uneven because it's only my view. So the person who wrote it originally, that was her view. It was very web focused and it was very immediate. So I have, that longevity in the industry, and I came from tech writing and then went into pure play web and went into product and so on. So I've kind of done quite a range of projects. So I've had a little bit of a glimpse into various areas, and I just put together from my perspective. So I'm happy to expand my perspective, but I admit that it's uneven. Somebody else could do an equally long article, and they might have a lot of things that I don't have, but they'll have other things. And
so it's very much like the medical example you gave earlier. A doctor or a researcher might write something about what they've learned, and then other people pile on and say, "Wait a minute, we've done the same experiment, and here's what we learned." And that, I think that's where you're getting at. So there were 4 discussion points too that you wanted to make kind of illuminate on today's show. Can you talk about what those were as well?
Sure. Well, the first thing that I learned from doing that article was that we've always done content strategy, but we just never called it content strategy. And I thought that was interesting. So if you go back to the 1940s, where it was like the earliest reference I could find to what we would kind of consider content strategy today, what it started out with was with the advent of computers, we were going away from handwritten. It used to be authors would handwrite things and then give them to secretaries who would type them.
Right.
And then sometimes you would send it off to a typesetter. So you'd send what the secretary typed and then send it off to a typesetter who would actually typeset it. And then they thought, there's got to be a better way. I'm trying to figure out, and we've got these computers now, so we can figure out how to automate some of this stuff. And that's the first, and I'm going to say guys because it was generally guys in the field then. So it was what these first guys tried to do is like, let's figure out how to automate this thing. Let's do this as a system. And so it wasn't about copywriting. It really was about that efficiency. And then it seems to have come full circle. And what are we doing now? We're saying we have to scale. We have to personalize. We've got to do omni-channel. Oh, we need a system. So we're doing the same thing, but at a much higher level and at a much more advanced level. Now we're looking at NLP and AI and things that didn't exist back in the 1940s. But that was, that's kind of the evolution of content strategy. In fact, Joe Gallner told this great story where he said this branch of, I think it was like the military or some big government department, they were using those old Wang processors to do structured content. And then the rest of the world went off into desktop publishing and they never did. And so at the very end of the day, when they said, okay, we need to bring this up into a more modern standard, he said that, the content was so clean because everyone was a specialist. They knew what they were doing. He said that the biggest cost was trying to dispose of the Wang processors because they were so big and heavy, and they ended up turning them into planters instead.
Oh, that's funny.
Greatest story, yeah.
All right, well, that's one of the discussion
That
points. What was the
one.
second one?
The other thing that really struck me was about how the industry changed and evolved over the years. So, as I said, we started off with engineers trying to solve some kind of content challenges using engineering processes. And so, if you think about back in the days at the beginning of writing code, they wrote something called spaghetti code. It was just like lines and lines and lines and lines, got very bloated. And then they went to object-oriented code. So you have like a print function. So wherever you happen to need a print function, you just bring in that object, and then when you click print, it works. And so if you have to update it, you update it in the central place, and then it updates to wherever you use that function. And we've kind of gone that way with content, right? So object-oriented content, we go, oh, well, we've got these ways of transcluding content, and you have all of these kind of boilerplate pieces here. And so I've got some content and I need those boilerplate pieces. I drag and drop them, but if I need to update it, I update it there. And Bob's your uncle. Very British.
Yeah.
I just got my citizenship, so I'm allowed to say that now.
Oh, no, wait. You're Canadian, right? My husband's Canadian. He says Bob's your uncle. So I think it's a Canadian thing.
Well,
so you're allowed.
A Commonwealth. So we have object-oriented content. And so now we're taking content down to like a more molecular level. And so it's a continuous learning cycle. I can't think of 1 year, and I've been in content for a lot of years, like 30 years or so. Yeah. I can't think of 1 year where I haven't had to learn something new, because it was production using kind of pre-desktop publishing, enterprise size systems. And then it was desktop publishing, and then it was online help. And then it was taking manuals, and instead of taking manuals and bursting them into online help, it was flipping that paradigm and doing online help and then aggregating it into manuals if you needed to. And then it was learning about like HTML, and then it was web publishing, and then it was publishing from a database, and then it was product information management systems. And it was just like every year there's something, and there's something different. And I'm still learning things new every day, every year. And I think it's sped up, if anything else. And just when I think like I've got it, I finally got it, and then something new comes along, and it's like, NLP.
Yeah. Well, you also say that it's uneven, right? That we don't learn it evenly.
Oh, no, because I still have clients, that they don't know how to use style sheets in Word. And when you say to the developers, well, but what about the content modeling for the CMS? Well, that's after the project, so the client will figure that out. And I'm like, no, you can't have them figuring that out. They don't even know how to use a style sheet. They don't know that like H1s are something that you tag up. They just go highlight, bold, this size, this color, right? So you can't expect people to do that. But then I've got other colleagues and other people in the content industry who make me look like a punter, that I'm not knowledgeable at all, because they know so much about, so many different programming languages and how to transform content and things, where I know about it, but I don't know how to do it. And they know how to do it.
Just like the doctors. Yeah. So we've always done content strategy, but we never called it content strategy.
Yes.
We have those changes and evolutions that have been happening and that we've been able to keep up, but unevenly. There's some specialists among us. And then you also made a fourth point, which was that there's short memory. What does that mean?
Oh, over the years, I've seen that we reinvent the wheel a lot. So, if you think about, here's one example that really kind of sticks in my mind, because I actually kind of got chastised. Somebody kind of gaslighted me, and I was the one that got chastised on a content strategy group. So, because I said, UX writers used to be tech writers, and we did something called embedded assistance. And they were like, wow, that's jargon. It's like, actually, it's just a term that professionals use between themselves. Like UX writing, write me a UX, show me the UX that you've written. I dare you. Right. So it's like everybody has those terms and that jargon that they use. And, it's the evolution of language, but it's also, yeah, tech writers used to do this. And then came the web. And then it was like tech writers over here, web people over there. And so what you had was developers, if you remember those 404 and the blue screen of death and all of those things where, developers wrote the user interface strings. And then somebody, somewhere along the line, the UXers went like, oh, no, we've got to take this away from the developers and we need to make this, better. So I remember the phase where UXers did this. But UXers, they have their strengths and it's not always content. And if I tell you how many brilliant UX folks there are whose first language is in English, we shouldn't be expecting them to also write. Who's supposed to do that? Well, we could have given it back to the tech writers, but instead it became UX writers who do it. Now, all those things, all that sophistication that tech writers had to develop because 20% marketing, 80% product content, 80% of the budget, 20% of the budget, right? So they had to find ways of developing and delivering all this content really quickly and efficiently. And all of that's gone. All of that's gone. Now they kind of like, well, write in an Excel spreadsheet and we'll do something with JSON. And it's always like the next new shiny thing. So instead of like, okay, XML is a workhorse. Oh, XML is boring. Can't we do it with, name, flavor of the day? And now it's markdown and crash down and the other markdown and the other, standards. They say standards are like toothbrushes. Everyone knows we need them, but nobody wants to use anyone else's. So there's all these standards there, right? And it just complicates everything. And when you kind of go like, look, why don't we learn from history? It's like, oh, history, that's boring. That's boring stuff. And it's like, oh, if we pooled all of our resources, we could make so much magic happen.
So when you say we have short memory, what you really are saying is that we like to reinvent the wheel, right? We like to learn from our own mistakes, not other people's mistakes, and that sometimes we're a little bit unaware, probably on purpose, of solutions that other folks have created, right? So those are really. Go ahead.
Well, I think that if okay, this is a caveat to all those CCMS vendors. Stop saying that your solutions are for technical documentation. That will be a complete turnoff. And I've heard people go, "Oh yeah, I looked at this, name something. That's for tech docs." No, it's for scalable content.
Right.
Tech writers have had to do scalable content. So this is for scalable content. Don't tell me it's for technical documentation because it's not just for technical documentation. They are the ones that happen to have adopted it.
Yeah.
Right. That that's a really good point. And I think all the marketing teams of the CCMSs should probably heed that point. So thank you for going through that list. That was really interesting to take a little stroll down history. So I want to just make sure that we get some time to talk about today and to talk about the future. So let's actually start with the future. So I want you to take your crystal ball out and let's talk about content strategy in the future. How is content strategy sort of evolving today? And what will that look like, say, 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Good question.
Wow. So this is a complex question. I'm just going to answer it kind of almost like an octopus with some tentacles. So first of all, every field evolves, right? So this is going to evolve. I don't even call myself a content strategist anymore because they think that I'm going to write the content. And I'm like, no, would you call in KPMG or PwC and ask for a management consultant and then sit them down and say, can you just do that accounts receivable entry while you're
Can you manage for me?
Right.
No, you go get some accounts receivable people to do that. So because content strategy has started to become used by everybody who wants to they could be a legitimate content strategist. They could be a glorified copywriter, but they're all using the same title. There's no control.
Right.
There's no mandated control. The way, like, if I want a project manager, I can say, I want a project manager with Prince 2 certification. And I know what I'm getting. You say content strategist, who knows? It's like the Wild West, right? So,
so what do you call yourself then?
I just say I'm a management consultant that specializes in content.
Okay, very nice.
Because people understand that. My clients understand that. I have different words depending on my audience. I try to speak my audience's language. So to management, that's what I say. Now, what's interesting is that in the UK, the government had content strategy as a designation, but they also had something called content design. And content design was the writing of content, but with UX in mind. So it's not just like, don't just give me content and I write it or edit it or whatever. I actually look and think, does this meet the audience's needs? Is it in the right order? If there's a video, do I put it up higher or down lower? Let's test the content. Is this even what they need to know? And there's a content designer from QuickBooks, from Intuit. And she did a fascinating thing where she's like, I follow people home. They invite me to their home and I watch them sit on the edge of their bed with their laptop pulled up on the dresser. And I look at how they work. And then we redesign the product and the instructions to fit their work environments. So that's a content designer. And what I realized was that a lot of content strategists in North America were using the content strategy title because they didn't have content design as a title. But Sarah Richards, who just changed her name to Sarah Winters, has been kind of socializing that term in North America. And I noticed that a lot of people are kind of gravitating towards that because that's what they do. And there's no shame in saying, oh, yeah, I thought I was a content strategist, but I'm actually a content designer. It's like, what do you actually do? And you want to have that name for it so that people know exactly what they're going to get when they get you.
Yeah, I think it might be Facebook actually switched all their content strategy roles to content designer roles. They just changed the name. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's probably way more accurate.
It's more accurate, and it's a different role. You have different expectations. So I think that's been kind of a good thing, is that we're starting to differentiate a little bit more. So now you hear like content engineer. So what's a content engineer? Anne Rockley called a back-end content strategist, but like, define back-end. It sounds like, two guys in a horse costume, right? I'm the front end and I'm the tail. Like it just didn't work for me. But now you get like content engineers, content architects. And as we progress, as the field progresses, we're going to see more specificity and better. And I watched this happen in UX and usability, where you would say to somebody, I need a wireframe or I need an information architecture, and you get the opposite thing, right? But then as it all shook out, then now we know what an information architect does. We know what an interaction designer does. So we're starting to see that same thing happen in the content field, is where you've got copywriters and content designers and content strategists and content engineers and content architects, because each one of them is a slightly different field, and you need to know different things to be able to execute well. So I see that.
Rahel, I can see, I can just imagine with all of these different names for the content folks, these content folks who are watching today are going, well, which one am I? How do I decide? Where do I head in the future? How do people think through those different disciplines and what they're good at?
I think it's going to be a minefield for a while, but I want to just digress a little bit, because you know that each government has a list of professions, right?
Yes.
And that list of professions, if you've ever gone to one of those websites where it's like, what do you do? And you look down the list, and you kind of go, my profession is not here, right? Content. Now there was a content conference by Condé Nast, a content company, and they had like art, design, art, illustrator, art, like 5 kinds of art. Then they had things as specific as shipbuilders, nothing for content. This is a content company, no content. Very, very end under W was writing and editing. And you kind of go, all right, it's time that governments and industry recognize that content is a huge industry on its own. It is a huge industry. And whereas you might have had at some point writing and editing, now you've got 20, 30 content roles, and content is huge. It's kind of like saying, how many kinds of accountants do you have? How many kinds of lawyers? How many kinds of doctors? How many kinds of content roles? And, you know, at some point they have to sit down with the industry association, and we don't have one, so that's part of the problem, and define those roles, because that's what determines whether you can go to another country to work, whether you can get a visa to do something. If you're unemployed, do they make you take a role that has writing and editing in it because you said the word content? It affects so many different things. So at some point soon, I hope, maybe that's what I'll do after I retire, is I'll just go be a lobbyist for content.
Very good.
We need you, definitely.
Yeah.
Hey, for the audience members that are watching the show today, in case you were wondering if we are going over a little bit on our 30-minute show time. So if you need to leave, don't fret. You can return back to the same URL that you're using to watch today's show live, and there'll be a recording available that you can watch later and share with others. So please do that. If you need to escape, don't worry about it. Rahel, there's a couple questions from the audience I wanted to see if you could tackle really briefly in the quick answer format. How is a content designer different from a UX writer?
I think there's a big overlap. So content designers are, depending on what you're working on, it might include UI strings. In my when I was in the healthcare field, I had 5 content designers reporting to me, and one of them was doing strings for an AI model. Another one was doing UI. Well, they were all doing some form of UI. Some of them did more articles. Some did just, you know, interface content. So as long as you are creating content, actually there's a page on gov.uk. If you just do gov.uk content designer, it will tell you exactly what the role is, the skill sets that you need, and so on and so forth. So it's quite well defined. But I don't think that there's, I think UI or UX writer is a subset of content designer. So, you know, if you're to do a taxonomy.
And another quick answer, if you would. Another quick answer, if you would, from a viewer. The question is, don't you think we need another description other than content strategy? I can see this becoming much deeper and more comprehensive than just the strategy label.
Oh my goodness, yes. And that's what I was saying is, like, if you had a taxonomy, then within each of those designations, you would have many subsets. So if I look in my class, so I teach at the only master's program in content strategy in the world. That's it's a 2-year program, and the people that come in are content people in their own right. So I've had people that come from marketing, people who come from social media, people who come from software development, people who come from product, people, you know, they come from everywhere. And so I've got 24 to 30 people in the class, and the range of skill sets there, it blows me away. Every year I'm just blown away by the amount of brain power we have in any given class. And so, yeah, they all, when they do their master's thesis, they're so varied. I've had everything from something on thought leadership and how it affects your content, to things about, you know, photographs for recipes. The woman worked for a food product, you know, food manufacturer, and so, you know, how recipe photos affected engagement, and, you know, and everything in between, you know, strategies for small businesses, for larger businesses, for social media, and so on. But the one thing I say is that no matter what you do, you have to start with the core. So we have a core. So this is like the anatomy in the medical metaphor is like, you have to know about the core. If you say we did the core, and then we decided that this is a segment that we needed to focus on, and it's only social media, great. But if you're focusing on social media without thinking about the core, so if they think about an airline, most of their social media is about what? Sending people to links in their knowledge base, right? This is your luggage policy. This is the COVID policy. This is the infant seating policy. So if you don't have a good knowledge-based strategy, you're not going to have a good social media strategy in that case. So this is the example I use to say, if you don't think about the core, like what's all the content we have, and let's think about it, then you can say, yes, we have to focus on our social media, but I recognize that somebody's going to need to do a knowledge base strategy for us to be successful, right?
It almost seems
I
like content
apologize for
strategy is the thing, and that we look at it from different views depending on if we're a content architect or a social media person or whatever.
Well, I think of it
Sorry,
as
Scott.
the umbrella. It's the umbrella
Yes.
strategy, right?
Go ahead, Scott.
I'm sorry. I'm playing the role of timekeeper, and in the interest of making sure we get everything done on time today, I'm going to ask Megan. Megan, this is a great opportunity to talk about Zoom In Software and how your company helps people bring all this content together. What exactly is Zoom In Software?
Sure. So Zoom In is a platform that ingests technical product content from any source, no matter how it was created or published, and then we deliver it into a documentation portal, into a community, a customer service site, or even into the product itself. And that way, customers can quickly and easily find the answers they need, while your organization can also increase product adoption and significantly reduce support costs.
Excellent. And you can learn more about Zoom In Software at zoominsoftware.com. There's also some information available in the attachments and links section of today's webinar viewing panel. You can click on any of those links or download some of the documents provided by Zoom In to learn more. All right, excellent. Megan, I think I'll let you ask the last questions for Rahel before we take any more questions from the audience.
Sure. I really am curious what your thoughts are on this idea of machine learning and AI and how this is going to impact us in the future, because I know nobody really knows, but there are a lot of different opinions. So I'm curious what your opinion is on that.
Okay, well, I think of all these new technologies as aids to our work. So if you think about the 1950s kitchen, where all of a sudden you could have a dishwasher and a refrigerator and a vacuum cleaner and all these like cool tools to make your job easier. All of these are making our jobs easier. I don't see it going away, though. I don't see our jobs going away. And I say this because like software developers are always saying to me, why can't we just use name the cool new shiny thing here to automate content? And it's like, you can automate data relatively easily. Automating content is still really hard. At some point they'll get there, automating it. Somebody still writes it.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to how you define the very thing at the beginning, which is that content implies some sort of context that a machine might not have today.
There are some things that are really easy to automate. So there's content that tells you what the latest seismic activity is, like where the latest earthquake was, right? So, but it's very formulaic. At this time in the morning, an earthquake of this magnitude was felt at this location, right? Really easy. So it means that a reporter doesn't have to get up in the middle of the night and send you that sentence, but they can send those sentences all the time. And when a reporter gets up in the morning, they go, oh, that was a big one. Better go and report on that. You can do this with sports scores as well. This team beat that team, but if it's a big spread and it can calculate the spread, maybe they use the word trounced instead. You can get quite sophisticated with that stuff. But the general, there's this whole body of content out there that can't be automated. You can automate the delivery of it, but somebody still writes it. So even in the AI model, I had Lucy, who was, tapping out content, cleaning up the kind of the medicalese version and putting it into plain language. and whacking it into an Excel spreadsheet that was then, imported into the AI model. So somebody somewhere has to write it. And we're still going to have those jobs, and there's still going to be things that need to be figured out. We still need to have a strategy, because I walk into most places, I'll mind you, if they really had their strategy intact, they wouldn't need me. But I walk into places and kind of go, you're doing what? you do realize that a computer could do that step in like, a couple of milliseconds, and you've got somebody who spends all day doing that. Like, really? Yeah. So those are the kinds of things
it's about practicality.
They don't know about. And so even getting them up to that baseline, and I've finally hit on the phrase, like, we are not using production grade systems to manage our content. We're using tools that were meant for casual business use. I want to write a letter. I want to create a report. I want to report back on my trip, whatever. But that's not for production. So it's like, if you think of like developers, they don't write in Notepad. They write in whatever program they have. Yeah. And then they do a build, and then they commit to GitHub. So where is our production grade system? And there's not a lot of those out there. If you want to do content operations, you can't do that. So there's still a lot, I'll be retired and dead in the ground before they ever figure this out. So I'm not so worried about, running out of work, for example.
Yeah, right. You'll be busy. That's for sure. So Rahel, you also mentioned, and one of our audience members asked if the Sarah Richards that you were referring to is from the organization Content Design London.
Yes.
Yes. And then also one viewer asked that they said you made a comment that there was no association for content, but the viewer says, I think the Society for Technical Communication as that association, though I know there are others. Please say more about your thinking on this topic.
So there is the Society for Technical Communication, and a content strategist who only does pure play web marketing programs would say, that's not for me, right? So there is no content strategy association. Like if you look for one, you just won't find one. There is none. So there are TechCom, there is UX, there are various, if you want to say, oh, well, I do more information architecture, I'm going to belong to the Information Architecture Institute, fine. But there is no content strategy association that speaks to government and to industry on behalf of content strategists. So the Content Alliance is trying to fill that need.
Interesting.
And they are a registered organization.
Megan, do you want to ask me the last question? I'm sorry,
no,
Megan, did you have a last question for Rahel?
No, I was just agreeing. I think okay. I'm good.
So anyway, to the audience members who've been watching today, thank you for joining us. We're out of time. Rahel has a previous commitment. We have to relinquish her so she can go and be a superstar in another group of people and educate them as well. Rahel, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing us what you've learned about content strategy over the years and giving us a peek into what the future might look like. I know our audience members appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a fun interview to do, and I'm delighted that you asked me.
Cool. Thanks so much, Rahel. And just before everyone signs off, we'd really love to know what you thought of today's show. So please look below at the bottom of the window, see the Rate This tab, and find the 1 to 5 star rating there, and leave some comments for us as well, please.
Yes, and if you've got suggestions for an upcoming show, you can type those in there as well. And before I go, I wanted to encourage you to show up for our next show next week. We're going to be talking with Sonia Deems of healthwise.org about how her organization uses structured content to power their educational efforts, helping them provide content as a service to healthcare organizations that need content quickly. So you're not going to want to miss that one. Even if you're not in healthcare, you'll learn something exciting from this practitioner who's got some deep knowledge in the subject. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Megan, for being my co-host again, and thanks to the audience members. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.
We'll see you again on an upcoming show.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoomin. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoominsoftware.com.